Good evening and welcome to the regularly scheduled Board of Directors meeting for Marin Water on Tuesday, March 18th, 2025. Terry, if I could have a roll call, please.
Yes, good evening. Director Diana Mayer,
Present.
Director Larry Russell,
Here.
Vice President Jed Smith,
Here.
Director Ranjiv Kush,
Here.
and President Matt Sampson.
Here.
Thank you.
Do we have any public comment on the adoption of the agenda?
Not on the agenda.
Great. If I could have a motion, please, to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second. Roll call.
Director Mayer,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Vice President Smith,
Aye.
Director Kush,
Aye.
and President Sampson.
Yes.
Thank you.
No closed session this evening at the beginning, so we'll move on to item number 5, public comment on non-agenda matters.
Yes, there are two speakers. The first one is Phil Sauter and then Leonie Terfo. You can hold on for a minute.
Yeah.
Let me get this.
Where you get my timers teed up. All right.
Go ahead.
All right. Thanks. A couple of weeks ago, a friend and I were pulling invasive broom from a site on Rosario Road in Forest Knolls. We noticed a chain link fence with an MMWD sign on it. And my friend wondered if we were working on district property and if they might come and pick up some of the broom piles we created. The following evening, I attended a board meeting and asked Ben how I could find out if the district was still involved with the property. And he suggested I ask Alex. I did, and Alex said he'd look into it. 2 days later, about 36 hours later, my friend told me that a crew from the district had shown up early in the morning, cleared more broom around the site, and hauled off all the broom piles we had created during the past month. I wasn't sure if this was Alex's hand at work, but I confirmed tonight that it was. And I wanted to express my fellow broom pullers' appreciation to Ben and to Alex and to the district workers who responded so quickly and so thoroughly to our request for help. Getting rid of broom definitely takes a village, and it was great to experience this level of support from staff and from district workers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Hi, good evening. I'm here to ask you to reconsider the pipeline project Peter 3. As a resident, I of course welcome and thank you for your goal to secure the water supply for Marin residents even during droughts. But there are clearly better, more timely, less cost-intensive and more environmentally friendly ways to secure Marin's drinking water. Water loss can be significantly reduced and conservation can be significantly enhanced. Your charts show that more than 40% of Marin's drinking water is used for European landscaping and pools. And it is not the majority of Marin residents who overuse our drinking water, but it's only a few, 500 to 1,000 so-called super users out of 191,000 residents. In other words, you're planning to build a pipeline that will eventually cost 405 million and requires a 3 million annual operating cost to maintain water accesses of these few super users. And all of Marin water users will pay the price. According to your own estimates on the MMWD website, losses, there are water losses close to 2,500 acre-feet annually. Physical leaks bleed 500 million gallons a year. Instead of a pipeline, you could fix these leaks for only 10 million, hiring local plumbers and utilizing this top quality water. Compared to your planned pipeline, these 10 millions are a steal. 225 million gallons of water goes unaccounted due to inaccuracies. And of course, there's the excessive water use of some super users, which I mentioned earlier. This could be addressed with buybacks instead of a pipeline. These buybacks could induce a bottom-up county-wide race to conserve. And then there's the untapped possibilities for recycled water to meet the outdoor water use. Most importantly, there's the environmental impact. On your website, you call the pipeline's environmental impact minimal or non-existent. And to be honest, this approach to our sensitive environment makes my stomach turn. There's no minimal impact when humans divert water from a natural river and run a 13-mile pipeline through sensitive habitat. On the contrary, While Marin Water has not done an environmental study so far, you allege on your website the permit process will be easy, and that is only because our environment lacks appropriate protections. It looks like this is a fox guarding the henhouse situation. For the questions and discussions I heard, it is clear that you are interested in creating revenue. Of course you are, you have to make this work, but to create revenue, you create revenue by selling water. But you're not a Fortune 100 company, you are elected officials. We need to shift our way of life toward living within our means, and you are the guardians here. The guardians for Marin residents' wallets and for
Ms.
this
Leone?
beautiful county's nature.
Time's up, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
There are no further speakers.
Great, thank you. Move on to item number 6, Director and General Manager's announcements. Start to my right.
Nothing, thanks.
All good?
I just wanted to note that in the general manager's report, there's a mention that a staff abstract has been accepted for this year's American Waterworks Association conference as a presentation. And the presentation is going to report on the staff evaluation of microturbine energy opportunities, which we heard about, I think it was about 6 months ago or so, Alex, from your team. Just wanted to say congratulations for having that accepted in a national conference. And I hope that we'll, see similar efforts go forward. And final request, if you could share the presentation with us as it's developed for the conference, that would be great. Thank you.
It's glad to be back and glad to hear that we'll see you in Denver. Hopefully we'll get some more folks to join us in Denver at the AWWA meeting. That's it.
Great. Dr. Kush, you beat me to the punch on the microturbine one. So just another follow-up kudos for that. That's a really good thing to highlight. And also in the manager's report, talked about some vandalism at one of the tanks. I'm wondering how far we can get updated on the security features that are going into the hardening of the facilities and seeing if that would actually deter or actually prevent that kind of stuff from going. Also, a big thanks to a wide variety of staff members here for the ongoing public engagement on the Cosio Spillway project. The amount of engagement that's going in and the reach and the broad reach actually is really impressive, and it's gonna be really important to keep that going. So I very much encourage the continued public outreach and meeting, and including all the different groups that are going on today. So kudos for that. And then I'll continue to throw in a pile burning kudos too, because we're seeing more pile burning and we have a lot to go, but it's good to see take advantage of the weather window. So thank you for that. Brett, do you have anything on your side?
Nothing for me today. No.
Okay, great. Then we'll move on to board committee reports. We did have the North Bay Water, North Bay Watershed Committee meeting on the first Friday of March. It was actually my first one, and attending from South Africa, Director Russell. Thank you for hopping on and bringing up those legislative bills for them to look at too. So it was important for that. The meeting itself was really focused on the work plan for this fiscal year. So they're looking at putting that together, but it did feel like the talk of the room was the pipeline project coming off of that. Everyone wanted to know about it, or everyone wanted to hear more about it. So there'll probably be a request at some point for a presentation at that, but very productive first meeting. It was good to finally actually meet everybody and understand a little bit more for that. So with that, move on to item number 8, consent calendar. Terry, do you have any public comment on the consent calendar?
Yes, Mr. Phil Sauter.
Yes, I'd like to comment on item 8B, the general manager's report, which summarizes demand management activities for the month, year to date, and for the previous 2 years. This is an extremely important topic for several reasons. First, conservation is the top of our list of water supply options. 2, it's something we can do now. 3, it doesn't require the large capital expenditures that other sources of supply do. And 4, the more successful we are in reducing demand, the more secure our water supply is, and the longer we can survive a drought. And of course, reason 5 is that we've budgeted $3 million of customer revenue to fund these programs for a year. Going through the 40 programs, I found 4 where I could get a sense of what the results might be. The first 3 were 3 levels of cash for grass. The three levels combined show that 56,000 square feet of lawns were replaced through February. That's equal to 1.3 acres of lawns total for the first 8 months of the year district-wide. My understanding is that a lawn needs at most 2 inches of water a week. Even if the lawn was watered for 52 weeks a year, rain and shine, that's less than 9 feet of water a year. So let's say the full year we go from 1.3 acres to 2 acres of lawn replacement for a total savings of 18 acre feet of potable water, or less than 6 million gallons. That's an average of 16,000 gallons a day at most, and probably half that much. It would be a maximum, I think, of 0.1% of our total water usage. I looked at another program with actual results listed, and that's pool cover rebates. We did 35 last year, and we're on track to do the same number this year. I don't know how much water a pool cover in Marin saves, but the most I could find anywhere online was 18,000 gallons a year. So with 35 pool cover replacements, max we could expect to save from this program would be 640,000 gallons a year, or 2 acre feet of potable water. It was a surprise that such a long and detailed list of activities and a $3 million budget would put only 20 acre feet of savings on the board. That's less than a half day's worth of current usage. It may be, and probably is, that homeowner consultations and school assemblies deliver much more savings. But there's no way to figure that out from the information provided on the demand management report. I'm not asking to remove item 8 from the consent calendar tonight, but I will ask that the demand management report be removed from the consent calendar going forward. Given its importance and budget, I think it deserves its own spot on the agenda and greater focus on the actual water savings from these activities. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Marilyn Price. Go ahead, Ms. Price.
Hi. Yeah, I just want to thank the board and its staff for all the work you're doing to supply clean water to our Marin residents. I also want to thank Phil Sauter for his comments at most of your board meetings. He takes the time to research the issue of water conservation and very often requests data from MMWD. I get the sense that he does not receive the data requested. I know the board cannot reply to the questions and comments presented by the public during comment periods, but as a Marin resident, I would love to hear your replies. And I think others attending or hearing the recording of the meetings would appreciate this too. I also like Phil's request for demand management reports having their own spot on the agenda. I'm not a data person, but I do feel we can fill our water needs in Marin through conservation. And my opinion is that more study of conservation is needed. In the last meeting, Phil also mentioned the recent Supreme Court ruling undermining the 1972 Clean Water Act that will now allow greater discharge of raw sewage in the U.S. waterways, and that this could possibly affect water from the Russian River. Our residents need to know more about that too. Finally, speaking of the possibility of Russian River water affecting the quality of our Marin water, an EWG study was recently distributed showing the amount of contaminants in our Marin water supply. I'm sure that many of our residents received their report and would love to hear the reaction of Marin MMWD to this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Price. There are no further speakers.
Thank you. If we have a motion to adopt the consent items, please.
Yep, so moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Director Mayer,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Vice President Smith,
Aye.
Director Kush,
Aye.
President Sampson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Moving on to our regular item tonight, the adjustment of the district capacity charges, consider revised board policies number 12 and 27 related to the collection of capacity charges.
Thank you, President Sampson and board. I'll go ahead and kick this item off here today. We have with us here today a consultant from Bartle Wells. His name is Eric Helgeson. He was the lead consultant on this project. We also have with us representative from Engineering Services Manager Joseph Eichens, as well as Greg Plum, who's our financial analyst. And then we have Jared Mills as our staff attorney. I highlight that because this really is a group effort. It's been a years-long effort as we've really taken a comprehensive look at the overall data that we have in our overall water system. We've taken inputs from a variety of sources throughout the district. And as Eric will explain here, we've also compared ourselves to what is kind of industry standard, industry expectations for these type of charges. And it really is a lot of detail and a lot of data is in the report. We'll do our best today to simplify that and kind of, highlight the key changes that your board will consider today. But I did want to take a minute to thank everyone for their work on this project over the last year. I'll also remind the board that this will be our third time kind of running through this. We've done periodic updates throughout the fall, I believe in August and in November, touching on kind of our progress through this and some of the directions we were taking. And so there's not many major changes from those initial updates. We refined some of the numbers and really made sure we had all of our ducks in a row, our I's dotted and our T's crossed. So I'm feeling pretty confident about the underlying data in here and the underlying work, and we're happy to share it with the board and to answer any questions you may have. So as we go into the overall presentation, you'll hear a little bit from me at the beginning. I'll talk a little bit about the background in our existing capacity charges. I'll turn it over to Eric in the middle to talk about his work on that and studying the overall system and the recommendations from Bartle Wells, as well as the proposed new capacity charges. And then at the end, we'll turn it over to Jared and legal staff to walk us through some of the more required steps in terms of the ordinance, the resolution, and the board policies that go with this recommendation here. So our current residential capacity charges, let me start here. So the capacity charge study, as I mentioned, was conducted by Bartle Wells and Associates. They are an independent advisory firm. The last time we took an update to this item was in 2018. So it's been about 6 years. And so we got a lot of new data, and there had been developments along the way as well in terms of California code that we'll talk about. Capacity charges in general, what are we talking about when we go into this? Next slide, please, Terry. Capacity charges, they're a one-time fee. They're paid by new customers to our system. When new customers want to connect to a new water service, they're also paid by existing customers if there's requiring increased capacity in our system or a change in use on the property. They're basically costs that are levied to recover kind of the investment that the rest of the district and our capacity or our district has put into investments over the last 100+ years here. To recover the costs that we've already invested into our system for expanded or new water connections. One key change you'll see here, and especially later on as we talk about the ordinances that support this, is that we are changing our term from what we used to call a connection fee into a capacity charge. And that reflects it's a better understanding and more consistent with legal code for what we're actually charging for is the capacity of our system. We're charging new customers and new connections to be a part of that capacity. Next slide. Legal framework, again, although this is not covered by Prop 13, which is covered in our rates, there still are government code sections that apply to how we administer these fees. And the key provision within that is that we can't charge more for the capacity that we're offering than the reasonable cost of providing that service. So a lot of the work that we put into this report and the background is really to kind of document and to justify the fees that we're charging to prove to that effect that we're not charging more than the service actually costed. We're just trying to get a fair and reasonable cost allocation for what we've already put into the system. Capacity charges can recover costs for existing facilities, which is what we currently have. There is an option, as we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation, to recover costs for future facilities. There are additional requirements and additional legal kind of compliance you have to do if you're going to do future facilities. And so we're going to focus today, as Eric will talk about, on our existing facilities and recovering the costs for our existing investments. But nonetheless, both of those are allowable under the legal framework. And then the final thing from an accounting perspective and finance perspective is when we collect these capacity charges, we have to segregate them from other funds and we have to prove that we're using them back into our capital program. And so you'll hear us talk about that a little bit later too. We can't just commingle them with our operating or our rate revenue. So we do that as an accounting practice, and we'll talk about that more later in this report. So our existing capacity charges, as I mentioned, we last updated them in 2018. They're currently based on what's called a buy-in methodology, and Eric will talk about the different options we have there. As we administer it now, again, we call it connection fees currently, and we'll be recommending a change in that, but we charge it based on estimated water demand. So currently we have a charge of $44,098 per acre foot of estimated water demand. When we apply that to residential connection fees, We have a schedule in our current connection fee ordinance that defines the different areas within the Marin's water service area, 15 different areas and 31 sub areas. So there's, combined, there's about 33, or I should say 300 different zones that all have a slightly different charge. That results in a wide range of these fees from anywhere from 0.11 acre feet all the way to above 2 acre feet. And in dollars, that equates to $4,800 for a connection fee up to almost $90,000. So a wide range. I would mention in that though, that really is, many of them are more towards the middle. So our median fee is 10,500. It really is condensed in the middle there, but there is some longer tails if you're really looking deep into the schedules there. So we're trying to, as Eric will explain, we're trying to really standardize that and keep the range to be much more manageable and much more transparent to our customers. The median fee, as I mentioned, we charge now is 10,500 for a single family residence. When we talk about multifamily properties, we charge those at a reduced rate, which is about 0.6 of what is charged for single family residence. And so we charge them at 0.14 acre feet per living unit. So it really depends on how many living units you would be applying for. It would determine your charge under the current system. When we talk about our commercial connection fees, similarly, we have a schedule of about 46 different business types. Each of them have an estimate for how much water may be used by those businesses. And so that's been in effect for the last 6 years here. And as we'll talk about again, that's somewhat uncommon in the industry, but we do administer it that way now, depending on your business type. And then irrigation or landscape charges, those are based on a review from our water efficiency team to help determine how much is a efficient use of water on the property. So that will not change, as we'll talk about later. Next slide. And so as I've alluded to here, the initial observations we made, both kind of independently and also with confirmation from our consultant here, is that our current charge calculation methodology is not consistent with industry standards. So we're definitely kind of out there on our own. It's much more complicated, as I just mentioned, with the different zones and the different schedules we have for commercial and for residential customers. And then also the charges are based on use estimates, and which are not really necessarily linked to the water service demand capacity. So there's a key kind of distinction there, and I'll just touch on it briefly, in the sense that capacity charges are meant to be kind of a share of total capacity, meaning up to the amount you could use, as opposed to use estimates, which are more kind of targeted based on individual usage each year. And that's not common in the industry. And really, there's something we're trying to really be clearly separating here is what we charge in rates, which would be usage, as opposed to capacity and overall system over the long term, which is capacity charges. So we want to be clear that we're really distinguishing between the two of those. And we're going to do we've done a lot of work, and we'll explain that work here today and how we're separating those two as clear as possible going forward. And so with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Eric to dive deeper into the data here.
Thank you, Brett. And good evening, members of the board. As Brett said, my name is Eric Helgeson. I'm with Bartle Wells. Also want to reiterate our appreciation for all the input. It really is a team effort to bring all the data together and match it up to be a best fit, our recommendations be the best fit for the district. So we really appreciate all of the input from everyone on staff. So we had a few guiding principles as we went into this study. We want to recover a reasonable cost, reflect a reasonable value of the system. We want to make sure it's proportional when we recommend the fees. We wanted the methodology that we use to develop the charges to be industry standard. And we also wanted the result to be easy to administer and explain to customers as well. And finally, also comply with all of the legal requirements, which is always a significant thing with revenue, with fees and charges. Next slide, please. So the overall methodology for capacity charges is fairly simple. First, develop the cost of facilities that you're going to recover that the fee is going to recover. This could include buying into existing facilities as well as capacity for new growth. In this case, we focused on only the buy-in for existing facilities. The next step is to identify the capacity. And so our recommendation was to look at the meter equivalent units, similar to what we did in the rate study. And so the total capacity of the system would be the meter equivalent units. Then we calculate the cost per unit of capacity. So essentially, step one is the numerator, step two is the denominator, step three is developing the unit cost. And with meter equivalent units, step four, the proportionate charge, it's the cost per meter equivalent based on your meter size. So it's a more straightforward than some of the tiers and other items we've looked at before, but it's a straightforward process. Next slide, please. So we recommended that the district continue to use the buy-in approach for valuing the system and not look at charging for additional capacity. The reason for this is that the system's already substantively built out, and it already has enough existing capacity to support the development that the district is likely going to see in the near or medium to near future. We looked at about a 20-year horizon when we were looking at the fees. The way we valued the infrastructure, we recommended to still use the replacement cost, new, less depreciation. What that means is looking at we look at the value of the system in today's dollars. A lot of assets are built a long time ago, and so we want to look at the replacement cost today to make it on a apples to apples footing, but then also reflect that these assets have experience where they're not brand new assets, so we adjust them to reflect appreciation. Our other recommendation was to use meter equivalent units as the basis for the fee. This is a very industry standard practice because it is a very straightforward approach, and also meter capacity is a very good indication of the capacity of each connection. So it's basically the size of the pipe that's connecting to the water main, and we look at the maximum safe flow is how the meter equivalent is based. So it's really looking at the maximum safe capacity that customer has available to them. Our final recommendation was to have a single charge for single family duplex connections up to 1 inch. The reason for this is that there have been newer regulations regarding fire flow, and so customer future connections are likely going to be sized higher than they were. But we looked at the water use, and really below 1 inch, it's fairly homogeneous, and really it's all the demand of a domestic user. So that was our final recommendation. Next slide, please. And getting into a little more detail on kind of the steps, how we valued the system, we looked at both the original cost for a number of assets. So the original cost escalated into today's dollars. But then for certain assets, and the most significant one, well, really the only asset we looked at, but it's a significant part of your system, was the distribution system, the pipelines. Your pipelines, a lot of them are quite old, and it's the largest part of your infrastructure. And so we looked at those, instead of looking at the accounting value, we looked at the actual length of pipe and the current replacement cost based on recent projects, and used that to create the system value. And then we looked at the average age. So instead of the accounting depreciation, we looked at the useful life and then the average age to get the remaining value of the pipelines. So that was a slight change in how we and how the system valuation was approached. I guess next slide, please. For capacity, we looked at not just the meter equivalents in of the existing system, we made an estimate to also look at the total meter equivalents 20 years out. And the reason for this is that we wanted to conservatively estimate the capacity of the system based on the amount of potential new growth that you may have, or whether by upsizing or new build. We did a number of in order to not overestimate the value. There were a number of steps along the way that we made conservative assumptions, and this is one of the more significant ones. But we ultimately identified the total system capacity based on the 2045 meter equivalent units to be about 95,000 meter equivalent units. Next slide, please. Oh, one other point, sorry, on this slide. Just to note that this shows your single family and your commercial customers. And just to highlight that the vast majority of your customers are single family duplex customers, 53,000 of your 61,000. So just wanted to, and the majority of those are below 1 inch. And when it comes to your commercial customers, 7,310 are below 3 inches. So the vast majority of those customers are also smaller meter connections. You only have about 160 that are above that amount. All right, now next slide, please. Sorry, thank you. So this is the formula for the capacity charges. We take the system value, which is $1.6 billion, or sorry, 1.6, yeah, billion, and then divide it by the total number of meter equivalents, which I highlighted, which we based on the 2045 projection, 95,360, and the result is 16,740 per meter equivalent. Next slide, please. And so the proposed capacity charges reflect that. 1 meter equivalent is the 5/8 or single family demand, and then the recommended fees go up from there. We also calculated an accessory dwelling unit charge based on plumbing fixture units, and that's just set to be equivalent to the average plumbing fixture unit in a single family home. So taking, and I believe it was 33 something, so just 16,740 divided by 33 gets you the 507. And the reason for that is there's specific regulations around how when you assess ADU charges, how that's set. The rest of the connection capacity charges increased by meter size, and moving to meter size is a very straightforward and uniform approach to just reflect the capacity of commercial connections or multifamily connections based on the connection, which is sized to their need, rather than a more complex way to determine capacity. So looking at how the recommended charges compare to your existing median charge and to neighboring charges, it will move you a little bit higher, still below North Marin. We also included Dublin, San Ramon. One other thing to note, we chose the East Bay Mud Zone 1. East Bay Mud has 3 main zones and 2 additional subzones that range from the 13,200 being the lowest. I believe the highest of the 3 main zones is about 40,000, and then those subzones are like 180 or 90,000. Just they're based on demand and then specific facilities to serve different zones. But just to kind of, I was highlighting that just to kind of paint a picture that these fees there can be arranged within agencies. There's also quite a range of reasonable ways to calculate these charges across agencies as well. But I think your fee is really in the mid-range and a reasonable reflection of the system value that new connections are receiving when they connect to your system. So our recommendation is to have the fees increase based on the change in the engineering news record construction cost index, just to so they continue to reflect the value as costs escalate, and also just to periodically review the fees and make sure that they're still in line with the current system value. And I think that, yeah, thank you.
All right, and I'll kick us off in the next section, which is essentially, now that we have the fee study done, how would we go about adopting these fees? So the first thing is the procedural requirements. There are a couple. The first one is at least 14 days prior to this meeting. If someone has requested mailed notice of the proposed increased charges, that would be mailed to them. The district checked, we have no one on file seeking that notification. Therefore, we did not need to comply with that. And then also there's another government code section that requires 14 days prior to this meeting. You basically post an evaluation of your proposed charges. That's essentially the study that Eric's Bartle Wells and Associates performed. And that was made available on the district's website. We worked with communications. It was a news story on the front page of the website. So it was widely blasted out there for anyone interested to take a look at not just the proposed charges, but also the complete study. And that was posted at least 14 days prior to tonight's meeting. In addition to this, there is also a 10-day notice requirement, which obviously if you comply with the 14-day notice, we've met. So we took the more kind of, I guess, liberal approach to make sure that we reached everyone and provided ample notice of the proposed charges being presented tonight. Terry, next slide. So essentially the way that this works, the government code requires adoption of these fees via either an ordinance or a resolution. The district's current code provisions require adoption of the proposed charges via resolution. So we're proposing continuing with that practice. There is a resolution in tonight's packet, which would adopt the proposed capacity charges as presented by Eric a moment ago. That also lays out kind of the recitals and histories of the district's capacity charges, what's being proposed, and all the legal requirements. The other item being proposed tonight is adoption of ordinance number 469. Essentially, this ordinance is intended to modernize the district code. Several provisions that were impacted from switching just simply the language from connection fees to capacity charges had not been updated in 40 to 50 years, like 1978, 77. So we thought that this was a good opportunity to go through and see, you know, which of those provisions had already been complied with. And what I mean by that, there were numerous instances that said by 1978, a water budget will be assigned. Well, we've already assigned that water budget. So in those cases, we just removed that language. It was no longer necessary, or we reflected that the district, you know, for example, would assign a water budget in those instances. So it was really just kind of a cleanup to reflect if you read through our district code, someone's reviewed it, someone's updated it, and it's not a dinosaur out there. The other thing, is Eric noted, we did align from connection fees to capacity charges in our language throughout all the documents, including the ordinance. Essentially, that just kind of reflects industry practice. We thought that that was the best thing to do. What I've seen is the confusion is often we have installation fees, which are to actually connect into the district's water system. So, for example, the piping, the meter, those items that have to be installed. And there's often confusion whenever someone hears connection fees, right? Because they're not sure that they're buying the capacity or the actual meter and piping. So we think, you know, migrating to capacity charges makes this very clear. The other thing that the ordinance will do is obviously incorporate the new methodology using meter size for capacity charges rather than kind of annual water use consumption estimates. And then the last thing I just want to point out is nothing being proposed tonight is going to impact any customer's water rates. This is not a Prop 218 water rate setting process. And the way that we've historically done this is we've assigned something called a water entitlement. From that, that's basically allocated out into a water budget. And then that's divided between 6 billing periods because we bill 6 times a year. And it establishes what's called a baseline. What we're proposing tonight would be to continue that same practice for assigning that water budget. It wouldn't impact anyone's rates in that way. And really, I just wanted to kind of point that out in case there were questions about that or any concerns. So, Terry, can you go to the next slide? Also in the packet, you'll see that there are 2 board policies proposed for updates. Another item that we looked at as we're going through this process is, do we have any board policies that haven't been updated that we should take a look at, make sure that they're compliant with current laws, first of all. There's been a lot of changes in the housing area to support affordable housing developments. So we did go through, we modernized those policies. Board policy 12 basically permits up to a 50% capacity charge reduction for qualifying affordable housing developments. And basically in this policy, we didn't make a lot of changes. We just kind of reduced it and simplified it. And before, it used to be like there were 3 different sections. One essentially was for a new development, sorry, I'm talking about 27, back to 12. On 12 here, actually on this, what we were doing is we were complying with a new affordable housing law that was passed. So basically everything in the policy is essentially the same. We did ensure that all the citations in there are still compliant with current government code citations. And then there was a new law passed for certain qualifying affordable housing projects that you could actually request payment of the capacity charges after notice of occupancy is issued or final inspection. So that policy update was just basically reflecting that new legal change that came effective January 1st of this year. And then 27 was the policy that I was actually jumping ahead on that we just kind of streamlined. So it provides a 5-year payment plan for capacity charges over $5,000 to give people who are maybe struggling to pay that capacity charge additional time to pay it. And then in this is what we streamlined. That was basically broken out into 3 sections, one being new development, one being like a meter upgrade. So you need a larger size meter. And then the other one being ADUs, and the requirements were essentially the same. So we're like, let's just make one set of requirements so it's easier to read. And instead of multiple pages, it's a simple, single page document for our customers to see. So Terry.
So this is the last slide here. Next steps, we'll turn it to your board for any questions you may have. And you can consider approving the proposed capacity charges as outlined in the staff report. And that would also include adopting the ordinance 469 as Jared just outlined to effect the change and the resolution to update the charges on our website. We'd be asking your board to approve revisions to policy 12 and 27 that Jared just highlighted that are related to capacity charges. And then the district will begin administering these charges in July 1st, 2025. So we have a couple months to let these settle in. And then as Eric mentioned, it's best practice to keep these updated based on inflation. And so we'd make that first inflation calculation more than a year from now. That'd be July of 2026 based on what we get in the construction cost index. So with that, I'll turn it over to the board for any questions.
Great, Brett and team. Jared, thank you guys for all your work on this. We'll go ahead and start with board comments or questions. Director Russell.
I'm a little confused in terms of how you integrate future capital costs, like the pipeline. When does that happen?
So as it is for now, the pipeline and all of our capital projects are rate funded. So those are in our capital improvement plan, they're in our budget, and they're funded by our rates. And so I think the idea there is you can't account for them in both places. So as it is now, we have it funded in our rates. There are other agencies where you have a planned, capital expansion. Maybe there's a known development. There's a need for a substantial new facility where you can start to roll that in to capacity charges. And some of the districts that Eric was highlighting on that chart have done that. We're choosing here not to do that, just to make sure there's a clear distinction between what's rate funded, which is our capital program, and what's buying into the existing system right now.
But if you take the 1.6 billion, I mean, it's going to go up
Yeah.
by the value of the capital.
It will.
improvement.
And I think at that time, when the projects are complete, we could probably, update the capacity charge in that section, and it would reflect the system's value once it's a completed project. But until it's complete, we were kind of stuck in that either rates or planned capacity charges.
So that means that the current plan would be once in 5 years that we would update that, because that's the recycle period for the report.
That is the recommended recycle interval, at least to review it again within 5 years to see if it still holds true. And then at that time, to your point, I think we would probably have a higher system value. And so we would at least want to update it for that, let alone any other methodology changes or to be compliant with any changes in California government code.
And I'm also a little confused on, it's going up and going down at the same time. I mean, depreciation means that it's wearing out.
Yeah.
But we're escalating it on its capital cost, but also depreciating it on its financial value.
Yeah, so I think you're right. That's exactly right. And I think maybe Eric can explain a little better, but I think in general, you have the depreciation scale. So you have to account for the wear and tear on our existing facilities. At the same time, the replacement costs, based on experience, are going up maybe faster in some cases than others. So in the report, we divided it out in great detail into the different asset types. Some of those we just took straight line depreciation because it made more sense. In other cases, we chose to take a look at the average useful life. I think we've talked about that a lot with pipelines. Is it 50? Is it 70? Is it 100? Is it more? And so we took a look at some of the more recent projects and some of our data there. And then finally, where there was a significant difference, we chose to incorporate that. If there was not much of a difference, as Eric mentioned, we kind of chose to err on the conservative side where we could. But in this case, the cost of pipeline replacement has been significantly higher in the last 10 years or so. So we incorporated that new charge into the future replacement cost.
Thank you.
Dr. Kush.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Brett, Eric, Jared, for a good presentation. I realize it's the third time that this topic has come up over the last year, but I have to admit, I didn't realize that the connection fees or capacity charges are restricted for capital expenses. That was interesting for me. I think, the some of the high level points I think I appreciate, particularly moving to the meter equivalent units versus the very independent calculations of water use or demand. I can see why that is becoming the industry standard. So glad that we're also going in that direction. I think maybe just following on some of Larry's questions, I did want to just follow up on the water system valuation methods that you used. So I understand from the presentation that we, to estimate the reasonable costs for recovering reasonable costs for existing facilities, we take the asset, we take the the value of the assets, their replacement, so that would be their acquisition cost. That's how you've labeled it. And then you've added on the escalation due to the inflation to bring it up to $2024, and then subtract depreciation. I could follow all that. And I know for pipes, you've not used that method. You've used the sort of current replacement cost methods. But when and it's great to see every asset is so well documented in the report. It's pretty amazing. You can see every activity that's taken place going back to 1912, actually. But the numbers still, for some of these, seem really small to me. So I was looking at the dams and reservoirs, and going through that process, the total replacement cost before depreciation is $286 million. That doesn't sound right.
Go ahead. If you have something, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to mention, I think age plays a significant role in that I don't know the exact age when those are constructed, but I think costs have not necessarily kept up, especially capital construction costs, I think have not kept up with inflation. And so the only capital cost that we specifically focused on was the pipeline. So I think if you had to build a new dam today, if it could be built, there'd be significant more regulation, significant cost, but there's also not there's not an easy comparison, whereas with pipelines, we can point to recent projects that have been completed and say, look, this is the actual cost. But with something like a dam, it becomes more qualitative almost. And and I think the other emphasis of the study was to also make sure everything could be easily pointed to and be able to defend every assumption that we made if you were challenged.
Right now, and I recognize that the 1 MEU now is about 60% more than the median charge that was applied before. So we're raising that substantially. And yeah, and I understand the argument there, Eric, but is there any risk that we're still undervaluing our system substantially?
I would say I think there's probably, I think we know we're undervaluing it. I think, and that's what you're saying. I think when you look at some of those asset classes, we just know, especially from some of the work we've done recently on our water supply studies, that they'll be far more expensive than that. And I think where we try to go in the study is if we have known comparatives that we can really point to and prove, such as pipelines, we have a lot of data on pipelines, then we can confidently put that into the report as that's what it's going to cost. We don't have any experience here rebuilding a dam. We don't have any, even some of the more kind of one-off projects like tanks that are so site specific, we had to struggle with that. Do we kind of take the average in the last 5 years or just a straight line depreciation? Because they can be so different between the two. So I think in any case where we weren't quite sure that we had enough data to support that, we just kind of went, back to a straight line depreciation and kind of took the conservative route there, knowing that we probably could go more, but until we can be sure that we can validate that and verify it and it stands up to any scrutiny, we didn't want to include it in this round of the report.
Yeah, I understand. There's a lot of judgment call in how it's done. As long as we're using, I think, the commonly accepted methods, which is why we have Eric here. But it's very interesting to see. Yeah, thanks. Nothing more.
I have a question. How does that value jive with the insurance value? Because we do that assessment too. Are they tied together?
They're based on the same underlying data. So when we go to our statement of values with our insurance review, it's the same information coming out of our system. I don't think they don't factor in as much on the replacement costs as we are here necessarily. Those come out kind of on a case-by-case basis as we make claims, but the underlying statement of values are based on the same general principles of what we paid for it minus depreciation. So it's very similar.
If I could add, I think our property carrying insurance is based on a replacement cost. So there would be an escalator factor from the actual value that we show on the books.
Well, that's even more interesting because getting back to Ranjiv's point about the 286 million, I mean, we all saw the numbers. Raising the dams is 600 million. Now, I don't know how much auxiliary stuff goes with that, not tied to the actual construction, but it does sound, I would even say almost shockingly low in its value.
Yeah, no, I think there's two different purposes, right? Insurance, they have their adjusters and they, as Molly mentioned, we give them our statement of values and they kind of determine, the escalating factors and what they can insure for. And I think, to your point, they're probably not perfect there either. And in capacity charges, since the onus is on us to prove our work, I think we tried to be extra careful and kind of err on the lower side if we needed to, just to make sure that, like I said, we could pass all levels of scrutiny with this particular report. Thanks.
Director Mayer.
Yeah, thank you for that very detailed presentation. I have a couple of questions, and Brett, I'd love to bend your ear afterwards to ask you some more basic ones that I don't want to take everyone's time on. But the buy-in versus expansion cost, so is it essentially buy-in is essentially the costs of things now with taking into account appreciation, and then minus or inflation minus depreciation and expansion costs is looking at what things potentially will cost in the future. Am I understanding that right?
I think the first part is correct, that buy-in is basically kind of the depreciated value of everything we have currently on our books. My understanding, and Eric can correct me, is for expansion would be if you're known to have a significant project that you're about to work on, such as if you had a new development in your jurisdiction, or if you had a significant project that you're already on your capital plan and you know you're going to have a large new facility. So as Larry mentioned, we're close to that, but that, I think one of the distinctions there too is, capacity of the current system versus kind of the reliability in extreme droughts is one thing that we're kind of always talking about. And so the water supply project is more meant to add reliability in the face of an extreme drought. And so it's kind of on the borderline of whether that's considered expansion, because we technically have enough, water for the day-to-day or the normal years here for all of our customers, plus then some, as evidenced by the times that we spill, over the reservoirs. So expansion for this purpose is more if you're expanding your service area, if you're expanding, significant capital facilities to be able to serve your ongoing demand of your customer base.
Thank you. And is there any sense of, I'm trying to compare apples to apples. So like the $44,000 per acre foot and the median fee of $10,500. Do we have any sense of where we might land, like how those will look with this new plan, say a year out from now?
So if I'm understanding correctly, so the median right now is in that 10,000 range. And when we're setting the new single family residentials up to an inch size meter at the 1 MEU, which is around $16,000, that'll be the median by definition, because that is by far the overwhelming kind of leader in terms of the number of applications we get and in terms of the number of existing properties we have in our service area. So the median will coalesce right around that 16,000 number.
Great. And then the last thing I wanted to ask, and this might be a question for legal, is seeing how extensive this process is and how carefully we're looking at costs and taking depreciation out, and also being aware that installment fees are a major way that we can keep our costs of water, somewhat reasonable. How do the two jive? Like if we're essentially just charging people for replacement costs or costs of water and knowing that we can't charge more than that, how do these become a source of additional income to kind of, in some manner, subsidize what we're charging for water?
So I'll take the first stab at that, and I'm happy to let legal jump in. But the idea here is that, by California government code, we have to deposit the revenues here in the capital program. Currently, our capital program is largely rate funded. So we have our capital maintenance fee that funds, about half of it, and we have our other water rates that fund essentially the other half. So when we update these capacity charges, we'll be able to ideally collect, at least a more reasonable amount for system buy-in, essentially buying into our system. And that will give our capital fund more, fund balance essentially, so we can fund more projects and more improvements, not by our ratepayers, but by the new entrants to our system. So it should, alleviate to some degree, some of the impacts of rates, but it will ultimately depend on the level of development and the type of development in our system. But the short answer is we put it in our capital fund, and that means we'll have more resources in the capital fund, which means we have to, rely on rates a little bit less, within our current customer base.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. So capacity charges specifically under the government code are defined as a tax if they exceed the reasonable costs of providing the service and require a 2/3 vote. So tonight, whenever you hear us saying we're taking a more conservative approach, absolutely, because we don't want someone claiming that this is a tax and that we should have taken it to the voters. So we did do that. And then specifically to your question, I think the other kind of answer to that is no, we can't charge more than the reasonable cost of service, but we are seeing the legislature do a lot of things. For example, the new law that I mentioned that was effective January 1st of this year, right, provides payment of the capacity charges at the time of final inspection. So in some cases, that could be years later that they ultimately pay their capacity charge because the building could be constructed during that time period. Some other things that we are doing are like the payment plan. The other things for affordability, ADU laws, obviously those have been passed since, I believe, 2016 was kind of the first one. And what you saw is the legislature said, hey, water agencies such as Marin Water, you know, you can't charge these certain agents or certain ADUs additional capacity charges. And also you can't require a separate water meter for them. So that substantially reduced the cost. And actually in the ordinance tonight, there is a whole subsection in there about ADUs that no longer are required to, you know, pay these capacity charges, which before would be tens of thousands of dollars is what we were hearing from customers. So I think state law is kind of taking care of that. And that's also allowing us to, I guess in a legal framework, spread those costs to customers because it is a legal requirement then, rather than the district's trying to do this on its own. So.
Thank you. Just one last quick question. So policy 27, that's something that anybody can apply for? Is that correct? They don't have to be in a certain kind of government assisted living unit, essentially.
Yes, that's correct. So policy 27 applies to any basically new development, or under the proposed changes, if you needed to upgrade your water meter to the higher size to meet your capacity demands. You could enact, or for this policy, if your charge, I think, is more than $5,000, we talked about that. The $5,000 threshold would basically apply to everyone, even if you're going for an upgrade. So that would give you this payment plan, and you would pay over 5 years or up to 5 years. And then it's just slightly over the amount of return that we would get on our LAIF account. So very low interest rate for a customer.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, a couple things, just so everybody understands that when you build a new house or development, there's another charge, which is the wastewater side, that's equal or perhaps more than this charge. So, you know, these things add up pretty quickly. The other thing I think that's important is Jared discussed, probably could have discussed a little more, the part that I think it's important to understand, which is that if you're a developer and you're building something, and let's say it requires 2 miles of 6-inch pipe, you pay for that. The developer pays for it. So he mentioned it, that this doesn't include, I forget what you used, installation cost or something.
Yeah, the service installation fee.
That's in addition. And in some water districts, these numbers could be hundreds of millions of dollars. If you're in a rapidly growing area, Contra Costa County, Stockton, where you're getting, well, we worked in Las Vegas, 100,000 homes at a pop. You can imagine what these things add up to be. You know, this is a big check that's written, and many water districts, I won't say they necessarily depend on it, but they surely do depend on it in a certain sense. It's because it's so much money. And it just depends on, in our case, it's small because we look at 2% growth or something. It's fairly minimal numbers. But if you're in one that's growing at 20%, it's a lot of money going in the bank. And it's a fair charge because, you know, you're joining the group basically, and you're paying your share of, similar to the situation with Sonoma Water. It's basically what they're asking us to do is pay our share in for additional capacity out. So it's a logical thing. It's just when you get to the individuals, the big developers, it's different because it's just budgeted into the costs and it's spread out over all the houses. But an individual home can be a lot of money, and in your experience here, you'll get people coming in going, really? You know, it's that much money. Because it can be a large home, it could be, you know, 100 grand, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Director Smith.
Yeah, great. I appreciate the staff's work to clean up this this ordinance that we have. I think it's just an important step for our agency's desire to do things right and to be more amongst the norm of other agencies out there. I am curious how 10 years ago we did come up with the structure we did. I don't know, Larry, if you have any comments on that, but it seems to be so out of the norm. It's unusual, but I'm glad we're doing this. I'm also glad that we're giving our customers the ability until July 1st to say they want to put in new hookups, which is great. And some might want to wait until after because it might be less expensive. So this will benefit some one way or the other. So I appreciate getting the word out and being as public as we possibly can. But this seems like a great step and a good cleanup. So thank you for finding it, and look forward to other exciting things like this.
The only comment I would have about 2018 is that it applies to the county in general. I think we often think of ourselves as an island. And I'm guessing, because I don't exactly remember, but what I kind of recall is that it's the way we always did it. And it's just a continuation, which isn't unreasonable a way to look at it. It's just not very sophisticated. This is a much more sophisticated approach than we've used in the past. And because it doesn't affect the normal user, you don't get much. I mean, you can see, there's nobody in the audience for this issue. The people don't push too much. And the builders, like I say, they look at it as cost doing business. So they don't worry about it too much either, because it's the buyer's problem, not their problem. So I'm guessing that's what we did, is just the way we've done it for 100 years, and we just kept going.
Yep, Brett, thanks again for the team. And I also appreciate the change with the 1 inch on the residential to incorporate the fire sprinkler stuff. We heard a lot of pushback on why am I paying for this that's almost never being used. So clearing that up is a big move too. I know it's a small little line item, but thank you for doing that. Can you touch on the impacts for this for recycled water in terms of connection fee increases?
So we don't make a distinction in connection fees, whether it's recycled water or not. I think it's just the connection itself to the system. And then depending on the area that you're in, we may require a dual plumb, or it may require recycling water for irrigation. But overall, that's just a meter that goes in, and it's kind of regardless of whether it's recycled water or potable water, it's the same connection to the overall capacity. It's one system as we see it. Our overall water distribution system is one
Okay, so
system.
it wouldn't be 2 connection charges then? It would just be, would you add up the meter sizes? Is that?
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, but if you, I mean, it's just the one connection size for the potable water. And then if you had an irrigation account, you'd pay the connection size on that irrigation account as well. And it wouldn't be different whether it was potable or whether it was recycled water, you would pay the 2.
So you have, so the folks developing in the recycled distribution area are going to be required to pay 2 connection fees?
If they have an irrigation account?
No,
they would.
just recycled water.
Typically recycled water is used for irrigation. The dual plumbs, we just charge as though it's just potable water. We don't charge a second fee for the dual
Okay,
plumbs.
so I'm sorry, that was the distinction. So the folks that are required to dual plumb, they're not going to get hit twice with this. That won't change at all.
No,
Okay,
it's
great.
just the
Thank you
one
for that
property.
clarification. The big one I think that probably deserves just a little bit of clarification, and you touched on it earlier, Brett, was, we look at our system and we talked about a buy-in component because the current system has enough to meet the demand for our users currently. But then in the same token, we're about to spend $200 million on a pipeline to avoid future proofing our system, and then throw in the RENA requirements and the RENA numbers, which I think can lead logically to an expansion of the district's area there. So how do we account for those future costs? Because it's going to benefit the folks buying into the system now, because we're doing this to make sure that we don't have a quote unquote, issue like we did a few years ago in an extreme drought. I understand we can't fight for that, but if we're going to be expanding currently based on requirements from Sacramento, how do we not start future proofing that now?
So I'll try to take that piece by piece. I think what I mentioned earlier, I think the idea is, water supply and water supply reliability are kind of 2 separate issues in a certain sense here. So when you do the buy-in methodology, you're saying essentially you want to connect to our system, and our system being the broadest sense of that system, right? All of our facilities we have now, everything on the books. As we've talked about, we don't quite have the pipeline project on our books yet. And so I think if we were expanding, say in the case we were expanding the pipeline project because we knew we had a huge development in a certain part of town and we had to have that water here just to serve the day-to-day needs, that would be more the expansion model. And we would charge that specifically, as Eric mentioned, to the certain zones that are benefiting specifically from that. In our case, the pipeline project that we're considering is for the benefit of all users in the system. It's for reliability of the entire system, and it's not constructed yet. And so I think the idea would be is we pay for that with our rates currently. Once that's constructed, that'll be a part of the entire system, and then we'll fold that back into a subsequent capacity fee study at that time, and that'll be just the part that they're paying into the regular system plus the additional reliability factor. And so eventually that'll make its way into our capacity charges, but there's no specific population that benefits from it right now. So there's no specific area we could apply that to. And I think we've made the case in many documents that, you know, in a normal year, we have capacity for at least the RENA level of development. And I think we've, you know, established that. And so there's not a water supply issue there that we can link to a capacity and expansion type of a model here. And again, we're trying to take the more conservative view here. So we're trying to kind of play it as straight as we can, in the sense that once we have that, you know, PETA 3 pipeline constructed, we will fold that into the next round of capacity charges. But for now, we're going to rate fund that.
Okay, great. And that's really helpful to hear, because we hear a lot about, you know, why aren't we buying in? Why aren't we allowing people to contribute to the resiliency of the actual system, because it is a benefit for them. So that clarification was very helpful. Thank you. Lastly, just for an update, and I know it's in the report, I just was looking for it, but the recurrence of the inflation factor going into that, is that going to be something that's a board motion or just baked into the cake as we move forward?
So that is actually baked into the cake, to take your words for it. Baked into the cake, and it will occur starting July 1st of 2026, and then each July 1st thereafter.
Excellent. Great. Thank you for that.
And I would just add too, that that's been our consistent practice the last 5 years as well. And so each year we calculate that amount and we update the fees and we post them. And it's just so happens the last year or two, the inflation's been very low. It's been right around, 1% or 0%. So some years it's high and some years it's not. And it's based on the local construction cost index. And so that won't be a change in practice. It's a best practice to make sure you're not losing, to inflation over time.
Appreciate that, because I think, not getting behind is a really important thing. And you guys have laid a really good groundwork to get us moving forward in the future. So thank you very much for staying on top of this. Appreciate it. Any additional board comments? Okay, great. Public comment.
Yes, Phil Sauter, please.
I'm one of the audience members who didn't have this as an issue, but I did get confused in thinking about the word capacity fee. I'm concerned that maybe we're creating an expectation of capacity. I could see, for example, in a drought year, someone who wants to use his 20 gallons per minute coming back and saying, well, when you cashed my check for $50,000, you told me I could have that. And here you are coming around in a drought year and you're saying, I can't water my lawn. I can't wash my car. And I either want my money back or I want my 20 gallons per minute. So I can't think of a better word than capacity unless it were somehow modified to say a normal year capacity or a non-drought capacity or a wet year capacity. There's just something about that word capacity and a check for 50 grand that makes me think we'd be creating an expectation, and we never get in the yard if we wanted to do a flow restrictor under certain circumstances. Thanks.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay, great. Thank you. Jared or Molly, for clarification, we want to take these as one item.
You can take them as one item unless one of the board members is concerned about that.
Okay. Any objection to moving these forward as one? Great. I'll go ahead and entertain a motion, please, to adopt the recommendation or ordinance, 469.
So moved.
I'll make the motion adopt ordinance number 469, adopting the resolution updating district capacity charges, and approving revisions to board policy 12 and board policy 27.
Thank you for that. And we'll go take a second. Second. Great. Roll call, please, Terry.
Director Mayer,
Aye.
Director Russell,
But I would like to pick up on Phil's comment for a second. Do we need something like nominal capacity? Do we need to clarify that?
So in my opinion, and I would defer to legal on this as well, I think when we talk about capacity, we talk about the capacity of the overall water system, not necessarily the amount of water, per resident. And so I think in some senses, some of the purpose of the study was to more clearly define that and separate that, the capacity of our pipes, the capacity of our, infrastructure that's in the ground, the capacity of all the 100 years of investments does not equate necessarily to a water entitlement. It does not equate to a water, guarantee. It guarantees that you have the capacity of the system we have to distribute the water and to collect the water, but not a specific amount of water. So
You state that in the report?
I mean, I think
I
when,
apologize,
when
I
we,
just
when we
got this,
define
so-
capacity, you know, I think in the report it defines what the capacity is. And I think that it does not talk about the amount of water someone's using, because that's rates, right? Rates is how much water you're using, so it'll pay for that. But it's the capacity of the system to provide water, whether it's a little or a lot, is the capacity of the system to get the water to your property.
Brett, can I add one thing?
Go ahead.
Oh,
I was just going to add that with our recommendation for going to meter equivalent units, we were also moving to look at the equivalent capacity as related to the customers, not based on water use per se, but on the equivalent capacity between the customers. So before it was tied to a kind of an estimate of use, and now it's just tied to how one customer is equivalent to another customer with no usage assumptions underlying that equivalency.
And I'll just quickly add, so the adoption of the capacity charges being proposed tonight has no impact on the district's ability during a time of water shortage or even on a normal day from requiring that specific customer who's connected to the water system from complying with our normal water efficiency standards that are in the district code. Specifically during times of water shortage, we have the ability to adopt even further measures to reduce water use, which are in the water shortage contingency plan. So all those things would still apply to this new connection, you know, regardless of it being called a capacity charge. So.
Can we start the roll call over because of the discussion?
Sure. Director Mayer,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Vice President Smith,
Aye.
Director Kush.
Hi, and Diana, I'm sorry, I didn't even hear you make the motion. So
Of course. Yours was much better.
It was different.
President Sampson?
Yes,
Thank you.
great. Moving on to item number 10.
Thank you. So on Thursday it is our watershed committee meeting, as well as it's also the special meeting of the board of directors. And a couple of the key items discussed will be the Azalea Hill and the watershed facility review. Tuesday, March 25th, as well as Thursday, March 27th, we'll have the planning committee meeting and the finance and administration committee meeting. They're both duly noticed as special board meetings. Some of the topics for those meetings: water efficiency update and water quality monitoring work update for the planning committee, and then another budget update at the FAC. Then the week after, we'll have our first bi-monthly board meeting, and that will start at 5:30 with the closed session at the beginning. And one of the topics discussed that night will be recycled water. Also, please remember the Spring Employee Appreciation Event is next month. I need from a couple of you your availability. So please look at your emails and get back to me as soon as possible. I'm hoping by tomorrow by noon, because staff needs to know so they can start making their plans.
What are the dates being considered?
The dates considered are April 8th and April 10th. April 8th is a Tuesday and April 10th is a Thursday at 1:30. That's during the week of spring break. So I believe there might be some of the board that won't be able to show up. So we're looking at the following week, which is April 15th and April 17th, all starting at 1:30. So if you guys can let me know as soon as possible. I've heard from a few, but let me know.
Week is better for me. I can tell you that. I'm in LA for the 8th.
Okay, so the week of the following. Okay, great. Thank you.
Great.
Okay. Then this Wednesday is the Tomales Bay Foundation meeting. This Friday is the Lagunitas TAC meeting. And then, of course, the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority and the Climate and Wildfire Institute's meeting and events are the next week, I believe. I'm sorry. Yes, next week.
Great.
And that's all I have.
Great, thank you, Terry. Move on to item number 11, announcement of a closed session. Do we have any public comments on the closed session?
There are none.
Okay, we'll go and adjourn to closed session.
Thank you.
Returning from closed session with no report from the session, and we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting.
Time.
8:02.
Thank you.